She wasn't dressed for the occasion, just a simple woman, but when they threw her out of the restaurant, they had no idea who she was really married to. Sophie Roberts walked into La Solstice, hoping for a quiet dinner with her husband, Tom. The elegant restaurant glistened under the soft glow of chandeliers, but Sophie felt out of place in her simple navy dress and worn flats. She was used to the quiet life of a teacher, not the world of designer gowns and expensive champagne. At the host stand, the receptionist, Evan, barely looked at her. "Do you have a reservation?" he asked, scanning her attire with an almost dismissive glance. "Yes, Roberts. For two," Sophie said, pulling out her phone. She showed him the reservation confirmation. Evan glanced at the screen, then back at her, his smile faltering. "I'm afraid your name's not on the list." Sophie frowned. "It should be." "My husband called ahead." Evan gave a brief look, then coldly gestured to the door. "We're fully booked tonight. Perhaps you should try another place." Sophie's heart sank. I'm sure it's a mistake," she tried. But the moment the words left her lips, a voice from the corner broke the silence. "Is she lost?" A woman's voice rang out, dripping with mockery. "I think she's in the wrong place." Sophie turned, her cheeks burning as a group of wealthy guests eyed her, laughing under their breath. They whispered among themselves, passing judgment based on her clothes. "Ma'am," Evan continued, his voice more curt now, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Sophie's hands shook. She didn't belong here. She knew that, but the sting of the words was harder to bear than she expected. Before she could speak, the door swung open and Tom stepped inside, his presence like a storm, tall, composed, and impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit. He exuded an authority that instantly shifted the room's energy. His eyes locked onto Sophie, concern flooding his face. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice calm but commanding. Evan hesitated. I'm afraid this lady was just leaving," he stammered. Tom didn't look at Evan. His eyes were on Sophie, reading the tension in her posture. Then, without missing a beat, he turned to the host. "I'm sorry. My wife was invited here." "She's not leaving." Sophie's heart skipped. She knew who Tom was, but this was different. She wasn't used to him stepping in like this, not for her. She wasn't used to being treated this way. Victor, the manager, walked over, clearly uncomfortable. "Is there an issue?" Tom's gaze remained unwavering. "There is now. My wife is not being treated with respect, and I'm going to make sure it never happens again." The staff froze, realizing who he was. Tom Roberts, one of the city's most powerful CEOs, and the last person you'd want to offend. Sophie looked at Tom, her emotions swirling. She hadn't expected any of this. The dinner, the night, they'd been ruined by the stares, the judgment, the rejection. But Tom wasn't finished. His voice, calm yet forceful, filled the room. "I'll take the table, and everything she wants, I'll pay for it." Sophie's mouth went dry as the realization hit her. The woman they had just dismissed, humiliated, was the wife of Tom Roberts, the billionaire tech mogul. The tension in the room thickened as Tom turned to the manager, his jaw set in that firm, unyielding way Sophie had come to recognize over the years. The moment Tom had stepped inside, everything had changed. The cold glares, the whispers from the tables, it all evaporated. The high society elites, who once seemed so untouchable, now looked uneasy, shifting in their seats, exchanging glances. "Mr. Roberts, Victor, the manager, stammered. He seemed to be trying to find the words, but none came out right. He had no idea how to handle this situation. Sophie, on the other hand, felt a rush of mixed emotions: shock, disbelief, and a deep sense of confusion. How had this gone from an innocent dinner to something that could flip her entire world upside down? She turned to Tom, eyes wide. I didn't know you were—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. She had known he was successful, of course. Everyone did. But this This was a level of power and influence she had never truly understood until now. Tom placed a hand gently on her shoulder, his voice low but strong. "You shouldn't have been treated like that, Sophie. No one should ever treat you like that." As he spoke, Mila, the hostess who had first rejected Sophie, appeared with the dress Sophie had admired earlier. She had no choice but to hand it over, her face pale, eyes averted. The change in her demeanor was palpable. The woman who had barely given Sophie a second glance moments before was now trembling in front of her. Sophie took the dress, the silk slipping through her fingers. She wasn't sure whether to feel victorious or ashamed. She had always prided herself on humility, on not needing the luxury that came with wealth. And yet, here she was, standing in a world that felt like it was made for someone else. For a moment, she wondered if she could ever truly fit in here. But Tom wasn't finished yet. "I'll take that, and anything else she wants," he said, his tone steady. The power in his voice didn't go unnoticed by the guests in the room. Conversations halted. The clink of glasses ceased. The air was charged with uncertainty. The waiter, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. "Mr. Roberts, of course, sir. Would you like us to prepare a private room?" He was clearly nervous, unsure whether he should offer the best of the restaurant or wait for Tom's cue. Tom turned to the waiter and nodded. "No need for a private room. Just get us the best table. We'll be dining here tonight, like any other guest." He then looked directly at the guests who had been watching with curiosity. "And as for the rest of you, I suggest you remember that kindness doesn't come in a price tag or a dress." Sophie's heart swelled with emotion. Tom's words were more than just an assertion of power. They were a reminder that no one, no matter their wealth or status, should ever make someone feel less than they were. The injustice of how Sophie had been treated was not just an insult to her, but to everyone who had ever felt excluded for not fitting the mold. The dinner unfolded in a strange, surreal calm. The once tense atmosphere at La Solstice seemed to loosen with every passing minute. Sophie and Tom sat at the center of the restaurant, now clearly the center of attention. Waiters buzzed around them, offering their finest dishes, while the rest of the guests looked on, either in shock or awe. Some of them had barely touched their food, too busy whispering about what had just transpired. As Tom sipped his wine, Sophie couldn't help but feel out of place. The lavish decor, the sparkling crystal glasses, the rich aromas of gourmet food, it all felt like a dream she didn't belong in. She kept wondering if she'd wake up any moment, back in her modest apartment, with her simple life. But she wasn't dreaming. "This was real. Are you all right?" Tom's voice pulled her back to the present. He was watching her carefully, his concern evident. Sophie smiled faintly. "I just never expected any of this," she said, her fingers playing with the edge of her wine glass. "I don't belong here, Tom. I never have." Tom reached across the table, taking her hand gently in his. "You do belong here, Sophie. You belong in every room you choose to walk into." His words were gentle but firm, like a solid promise. "It's their problem, not yours." She nodded, grateful for his reassurance. But still the sting of rejection lingered. She had always been proud of her humble beginnings, proud of the life she had built with Tom, one that wasn't based on wealth or appearances. But tonight, she felt as if her world had been turned upside down. The treatment she had received at the hands of the restaurant staff had left her questioning everything. The next day, Tom's identity hit the media faster than anyone had anticipated. By lunchtime, the story had gone viral. Sophie Roberts, the woman who had been publicly humiliated, was suddenly thrust into the spotlight. The headlines read like this: "Billionaire's wife kicked out of luxury restaurant. What really happened?" And "Tom Roberts defends wife in public showdown at La Solstice." Sophie had never been one for attention, but there it was. Her phone rang off the hook with calls from reporters asking for statements. People she had never met were sending her messages of support, while others, who had been part of that same dinner crowd, took to social media to defend her, to apologize for their silence. But amidst the noise, Sophie realized something important. She wasn't just someone's wife. She wasn't defined by the clothes she wore or the money in her bank account. What had mattered that night wasn't her wealth. It was her integrity and the way she had been treated by others. Tom smiled as he watched her reading through the messages, her expression unreadable. "What do you think?" he asked gently. Sophie looked up from her phone, her eyes meeting his. "I think I've learned that some people are defined by their wealth and some people are defined by their character." "And your character," Tom said softly, "is priceless." The days following the incident at La Solstice felt like a blur. Sophie's life, once simple and private, had exploded into the public eye. Headlines across the city and the country chronicled the scandal. Billionaire's wife kicked out of exclusive restaurant had spread like wildfire, igniting debates on social media about wealth, privilege, and dignity. Everyone seemed to have an opinion. Some called Sophie brave, others dismissed her as an opportunist. But to Sophie, the attention wasn't what mattered. It was the message. She didn't want to be known as the wife of a billionaire. She wanted to be known for who she was, for the values she had lived by for years: kindness, humility, and the belief that no one should be treated as less than anyone else, regardless of their wealth or background. That evening, after a long day of media calls, Sophie sat down with Tom on their balcony overlooking the city. She couldn't stop thinking about how everything had unfolded, about how the incident at the restaurant had snowballed into something much bigger. Tom sat beside her, his hand finding hers. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft but filled with concern. Sophie turned to him, her eyes tired but clear. "I'm fine, but I think I need to do something about all of this. This isn't just about me anymore, Tom. It's about every person who's been dismissed, judged, or humiliated simply because they don't fit into someone's narrow idea of worth." Tom nodded. "You've got the platform now, Sophie. The world is listening." Sophie looked out at the skyline. The city glittered below them, a world full of contradictions. Wealth, power, and success sat next to poverty, struggle, and overlooked lives. For the first time, Sophie knew she had the opportunity to change that. The next morning, Sophie took control of her narrative. She reached out to a few key people: activists, educators, and community leaders, people who shared her vision of a world where dignity didn't have a price tag. Her story would be the catalyst for something bigger. Her first move? She used her social media platforms, which had gained traction after the restaurant incident, to announce an initiative she had been quietly planning for years. "I'm Sophie Roberts," she wrote, "and I'm launching the People's Dignity Fund, an initiative to support underrepresented communities, including workers in the service industry, teachers, and others who often go unnoticed. This fund will provide scholarships, grants, and financial assistance to those who need it most." She included a link to the campaign asking people to donate, share, and contribute however they could. She called for a new kind of respect, one that didn't come from wealth, but from kindness, empathy, and equality. The response was overwhelming. The People's Dignity Fund quickly gathered momentum, with thousands of people from all walks of life contributing. Celebrities, philanthropists, and everyday people began sharing their stories of discrimination and mistreatment using the hashtag "kindness is the new couture." Sophie became the voice of a movement she hadn't even intended to start. But it wasn't just about raising money, it was about starting a conversation, one that went beyond the walls of La Solstice and into the hearts of people everywhere. Sophie began giving interviews, not as the wife of Tom Roberts, but as a woman who believed in the power of kindness. She spoke about her values, about how dignity should be the standard in every space, whether it's a restaurant, a classroom, or a boardroom. 3 weeks later, Sophie and Tom hosted a charity gala in the very restaurant that had rejected her. The irony was intentional. Sophie invited not only the city's elite, but also people from all walks of life: teachers, waiters, service workers, and members of the community who had supported her initiative. The night was nothing like the gala they had originally planned. It wasn't about expensive dresses, tuxedos, or champagne. It was about unity. The guests mingled freely, no one standing above anyone else, and for the first time, the space felt welcoming. The food was donated by local vendors, the music by a community choir, and the auction featured not just luxury items, but unique experiences, like a cooking class with a local chef or a day spent volunteering with kids in need. As the night wore on, Sophie took to the stage, standing in front of the same crowd that had once ignored her. She took a deep breath before speaking. Tonight, we're not just celebrating what we can give, but who we are, every single one of us. This fund is about reminding the world that kindness is the real luxury. It's about dignity and respect, things that should never be reserved for the rich, but for everyone. The room was silent, save for a few soft sniffs. Sophie's words had struck a chord, and for the first time, she felt as if she had truly found her place in the world. Tom stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his eyes filled with pride. The gala raised millions that night, but it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the movement Sophie had sparked, the movement of kindness, dignity, and respect. Sophie's movement had ignited something bigger than she had ever anticipated. The People's Dignity Fund had raised millions, but it wasn't just about the money. It was the wave of change that had swept through New York and beyond. People began to demand dignity and respect in spaces where it had once been reserved, only for the elite. Sophie had started a conversation that reached all corners of society, from boardrooms to classrooms, from service counters to government halls. But not everyone was happy with her success. The New York Times ran a feature on Sophie's campaign, calling it a revolution in a dress. The piece praised her initiative, but also drew attention to the backlash. Powerful figures in the city, those who had benefited from the existing systems of wealth and exclusion, were beginning to take notice. They weren't pleased. Behind closed doors, the city's elite whispered about Sophie's influence. Vanessa Laurie, the socialite who had humiliated Sophie at La Solstice, was particularly vocal about the threat Sophie posed. Vanessa's influence stretched from the social scene to the corporate world. She had spent years building her empire on exclusivity and power, and Sophie's campaign was a direct challenge to everything she had worked for. "I can't believe it's come to this," Vanessa said, clinking her champagne glass. "A teacher, a nobody, stirring up trouble. She's making the wealthy look like villains." Her business partner, Gerald Klein, a media mogul who had invested in luxury brands and restaurants across the city, frowned. "She's gaining traction. She's no longer just a blip. This could turn into a real issue." Vanessa leaned in, her eyes narrowing. "We need to silence her. Not just her campaign, but her entire narrative. Let's remind people who's really in control." Despite the mounting opposition, Sophie refused to back down. She knew she had touched a nerve. The more they tried to silence her, the more her message spread. The pressure was mounting. Sophie's phone buzzed constantly. News outlets, social media, even politicians began calling her for interviews. Tom remained supportive, but Sophie could see the toll it was taking on him. His colleagues at Hawthorne Capital were beginning to question his involvement in her campaign. Their dinner parties, once filled with admiration and praise, were now filled with awkward silences and veiled criticisms. One evening, after a particularly difficult day of media interviews and calls from angry donors, Sophie sat down at the dinner table with Tom. He was flipping through some papers, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. "Sophie," Tom began, his voice low, I don't want you to feel like you're fighting this alone. But I'm getting pressure from every side. The board, the investors. This campaign is starting to hurt my business." Sophie looked at him, a soft sadness in her eyes. "I understand," she said quietly. "But I can't stop now. I can't turn my back on what I started. It's not just about us. It's about everyone who's ever been treated like they don't matter." Tom sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know. I'm proud of what you've done. But be careful. The people we're up against aren't just going to sit back and let this happen." Sophie's heart clenched. She knew what he meant. The elite were beginning to fight back, and it wasn't going to be easy. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She'd made a promise to herself and to the people who had trusted her to see this through. As the pressure mounted, Sophie found herself in a meeting that would change everything. It had been scheduled by Vanessa Laurie, and Sophie had agreed to meet with her only out of necessity. She didn't trust Vanessa, but she knew this meeting would be a pivotal moment in her fight. The meeting was held at a high-end restaurant, far more lavish than La Solstice, with towering crystal chandeliers and guests dining in tuxedos. Vanessa was waiting for her, a smug smile on her face. "You look different," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I thought you might be too busy with your little People's Dignity campaign to attend places like this." Sophie sat down, her expression calm, unwavering. "I'm here to talk, Vanessa, not to play games." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Fine, let's talk. You're a teacher with no business experience, no understanding of the real world, yet you've managed to stir up a hornet's nest. Why?" Sophie leaned forward, her gaze locking with Vanessa's. "I'm doing what you should have been doing all along, using your power for good. Instead of using it to belittle people and line your pockets, I'm using it to make a difference in people's lives." Vanessa's smile faded. "You have no idea who you're messing with. You think you can take down people like me and my network? You're nothing but a pawn." Sophie's eyes narrowed. "I'm not a pawn, Vanessa, and neither are the people. You've been stepping on your whole life. You've built your empire on the backs of others, and now the world is waking up." Vanessa laughed bitterly. "You think this is a fight you can win?" Sophie took a deep breath, feeling a surge of confidence. "I know it is." The days after the meeting were filled with tension. Sophie's campaign was now a full-fledged movement, and it was growing faster than anyone could have anticipated. The People's Dignity Fund continued to gain support, but so did the opposition. But Sophie had one more move left. She used the media she had garnered, interviews, press conferences, social media, to reveal the truth. She exposed the elitist groups who were fighting against her, pulling back the curtain to reveal just how deep the corruption and greed ran. She showed how they were using their power to stifle progress, to maintain control over the city's resources, while claiming to care about the public. The story went viral. The backlash from Vanessa and her allies was fierce, but this time, Sophie was ready. She fought back with facts, with truth, and with the support of the people who had believed in her from the beginning. The final confrontation took place at the Hawthorne Capitol Gala, where the city's wealthiest came to celebrate their success. Sophie, now armed with the truth and the support of thousands, walked into the ballroom. Vanessa was there, as expected, her eyes flashing with malice. But Sophie wasn't afraid. She had made it this far, and she wasn't about to let anyone intimidate her again. The room fell silent when Sophie stepped up to the podium, her eyes meeting Vanessa's with unwavering determination. She had the microphone in her hand, and now it was her turn to speak. "This is the moment when everything changes," Sophie said, her voice clear, her presence commanding. "We have fought for what's right, and we've brought attention to the truth. We will not be silenced." The crowd erupted in applause, and even Vanessa was forced to acknowledge the power of Sophie's words. The impact of Sophie's movement was undeniable. The People's Dignity Fund had raised millions. and the media buzzed with praise and criticism alike. Sophie had not only sparked a national conversation, but had also built a movement that encouraged people from all walks of life to demand respect, dignity, and fairness. But Sophie knew the fight wasn't over. There was still resistance from the powerful elite. Vanessa Laurie, the socialite who had mocked Sophie, had launched a media campaign against her, trying to reclaim her image. But Sophie didn't back down. Instead, she used the attention to push even harder for the changes she believed in. Her next move was at a city council hearing where major decisions were being made about wealth distribution and corporate responsibility. Sophie stood at the podium calm and composed, knowing this moment would determine the future of her cause. "The policies we pass today will shape our city's future," Sophie began. "For too long, we've let wealth decide who gets to be heard. But it doesn't have to be this way. We can make this city work for everyone." The room fell silent. Sophie's words resonated with the crowd. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been dismissed or silenced. In the following weeks, the People's Dignity Fund partnered with major organizations, and new policies were passed focusing on fairness and opportunity for all. The city started to change. The public rallied behind Sophie's cause, and her message of dignity over wealth became the new standard. As for Vanessa Laurie, her career never recovered. The public had seen the truth. Power and privilege weren't synonymous with worth. Sophie's victory was complete. She had succeeded not just in changing a few policies, but in reshaping the very definition of success itself.